Welcome to the Rejected Religion podcast. I'm Stephanie Shea. My guest this month is Dr. Joel Bordeaux. Joel is a specialist in South Asian religions with a PhD from Columbia University. He has published on East Indian Sakta traditions, early modern Hindu statecraft, Nath Yogi literature from Bengal, and Tibetan Buddhism in Anglophone popular culture. He is a research fellow at the International Institute for Asian Studies in Leiden, the Netherlands, and a member of the research group Body and Embodiment in the Middle Bengali Imaginary, based at Jagiellonian University in Krakow. As Zeena Shrek, the famous daughter of Anton LaVey of the Church of Satan, was recently interviewed by Jordan Peterson, I immediately thought of Joel and a presentation he gave 3 years ago about Zeena and her then husband Nicholas as they relate to Tibetan Buddhism, Tantra, and left-hand path practices. I asked Joel if he'd like to revisit this topic and to flesh it out, further expanding on this in light of the recent media attention that Zeena has had. He graciously agreed. In this discussion, Joel first gives a background of Anton LaVey and the environment of the Church of Satan, wherein Zeena grew up, leading to Zeena taking the role of spokesperson for the church during the Satanic Panic years, and then the circumstances that led to Zeena leaving the church to forge her own path. This takes us to other projects that Zeena and Nicholas were involved in, such as Radio Werewolf and the Temple of Set, their break from that group to form their own group called the Sethian Liberation Movement, or the Storm. Joel discusses in more detail the concepts of Tantra and left-hand path traditions that are used in their practices and beliefs. Another important factor that is discussed is the role of traditionalism within all of Zeena's work. In closing, we discuss our takeaways from Zeena's interview with Jordan Peterson. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi, Joel. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Very good to see you again and have you back. The last time you were here, that was some time ago. You were talking about Batman and Buddhism, which I thought was a great conversation. And today, we're probably going to be talking a little bit about Buddhism, but in the context of the left-hand path tradition of Zeena Shrek, formerly known as Zeena LaVey. I looked this up. It was already 3 years ago that you gave your presentation about left-hand path and Tantra and Zeena for the HHP Center. So I thought once I found out that Zeena was being interviewed by Jordan Peterson, and that dropped, I thought, well, maybe this might be a good idea to revisit this subject, and we could talk about it on the podcast for people who might be interested in this, to learn a little bit more about what this is all about. Because from viewing your presentation again on the HHP channel on YouTube, the Amsterdam, actually, the correct name of the channel is the Center for History of of Philosophy and Hermetic Currents. It is
Hermetic
one of those
philosophy and related currents.
That's right. Thank you. I can't even remember my brain. I have. Sorry, listeners. I have had maybe about three hours of sleep today, so I'm running on fumes. Yes, thank you, Joel. That's the correct title. It's we call it the HHP Center, just to be
for obvious reasons.
For obvious reasons, indeed, because we just stumble over all the words. Anyway, so I thought this would be great if we could revisit this, and this would also give you an opportunity to kind of flesh out a little bit more of these ideas that, of course, during the presentation you never get to talk about everything that you want to talk about because your time constraints and all of that. So I thought maybe we could start with a historical overview for the listeners who might not really know a lot about the background of Zeena Shrek. LaVey, although she doesn't like to use that word, that name anymore. I understand.
No.
Not at all. But, her father is Anton LaVey, and he founded the Church of Satan. So perhaps we could start with a little bit of background about LaVey, where he came from, what was behind the forming of the Church of Satan, and the ideologies associated with it. Maybe that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I can attempt that.
Okay.
We should run this if we get the opportunity. Run this by Marco Passi, because obviously he swims far deeper in these waters than I do. But yeah. So my sense, and Zeena now also has dropped the Shrek, and she's mononymic, or however you say that.
Okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, but
so she's like Madonna now.
Yeah, or Prince, or
Prince, right? Okay. Good on her.
Yeah, it's just constant refinement.
Exactly.
Yeah. So LaVey, he's a LaVey and Satanism there's a lot of interpretation that goes into it, and it's a question in many ways of interpreting people's intent, and you have to do that with the understanding that they're being cagey, or that there's an element of play or irony, or who knows, it's layers of obfuscation in between. But in '66, LaVey, who I think to that point was a professional musician, mainly, he was an organist, and a sort of very much a showman, a performer, entertainer, kind of a guy. In that interview with Jordan Peterson, I think that is to say, Zeena refers to him as a carnival barker on a couple of occasions. Yes. And I think he actually does have a background in sort of circus, some background in circus work. So he founds the Church of Satan, and the issue that becomes the most salient as things progress with the story that we're going to get into is sort of, well, what's his intent in doing so? Is it a religious movement? Is it a kind of a glorified social club, like a sort of a hellfire club or something, right? With some kind of religious trappings, but basically people are there to party. Is it a scam? So is some combination of these. I mean, that's kind of where I would land. Okay. You get different reports as to what he's really up to. So the official line that you get nowadays, anyway, from the Church of Satan, because it still exists, although no longer under his leadership, but they're still around, and figures like Marilyn Manson and so forth, some other unsavory types are involved in it. But I've also met some people who are involved in it, only a few, and somewhat rarely, but very. It is at a certain amount of pains nowadays, for them, at least for the most part, to present itself as a respectable kind of organization. There's a kind of a party atmosphere involved in it, right? That I think was more transgressive, perhaps a little bit at the time. But if you're thinking of it as a party environment, even though it's mid '60s, my sense of the vibe is much more like the Playboy Club in the 1950s or something. It's that kind of a party vibe. Mm-hmm. So very deliberately not about hippie stuff, not about counterculture. Sammy Davis Jr. was involved, right? And some of these kinds of, Jane Mansfield, and it is kind of a, 50s Hollywood kind of a thing. The Church of Satan, with the caveat that people say things in public and then they have other things that they, potentially do in private. They're a kind of party line on the existence of things like, or of entities like Satan is like, of course we don't believe in that bullshit. Right. These are symbol sets, we're about sort of subverting social norms, calling certain kind of moral pieties into question, telling people that it's fine to sort of pursue your own interests, right? And you don't have to be like ashamed and feel weird about, going after the things that you want, right? And just kind of, that's their general line. And, and they say, of course, you should do this within the confines of the law, right? So they basically, in sort of D&D terms, this is kind of a classic sort of lawful evil approach, right?
Right.
Like follow the law so you don't expose yourself to any liabilities, right? But then use the law to get whatever it is that you're trying to get, and like
Right.
don't feel bad about that. So your basic sort of, to be fair, I think most Americans are kind of in this lawful evil camp for that matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the general thing you would expect from kind of lawyers and finance types and political operatives, right? That, you know, if you can say that what you did was not illegal, well, then that's all the justification you need for whatever your behavior was.
Yeah.
So that said, people I've met have been charming and perfectly polite, and you know,
Sure.
the
Yeah. I've met people from Church of Satan, and they're friendly,
yeah,
kind people. So yeah, not that I know them, in any intimate way, but just in daily interactions with people, or just as an acquaintance, it's there's nothing that I could say that's untoward about it. So, and
yeah,
as for what I understand, this is more about this path of self-liberation and following your desires, whatever those desires may be. And if you're still doing that under the rule of law and you're not hurting anyone, then that's kind of the way it was, the way I understood it. So
yeah. Or if you hurt people, you should hurt them because they've given you reason to do
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Right. And you do it within the limits of the law.
yes. Yes. Right.
Right. Of course, one always suspects this is the kind of thing where, like, the YouTube channels that tell you how to grow psychedelic mushrooms have the little disclaimer that says this is for entertainment purposes only, and we don't endorse this behavior, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So, maybe one suspects sometimes that the rule is more like don't get caught, right? And the official line is don't do anything illegal. But for sure, like, they were not into drugs. Like, LaVey was very opposed to this. And the general political ideology was pretty conservative, too.
Right.
And by pretty conservative, I also mean, a lot of LaVey's writings are basically kind of Ayn Randian in their orientation, right? So the best you're going to really get, if you treat people well, you do it out of some kind of, enlightened self-interest, that kind of a approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and other parts of it are more overtly sort of fascistic. He cribs a lot of, or parts of the Satanic Bible from Ragnar Redbeard, sort of Might is Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's definitely this, the kind of a predatory edge attached to it. And, it's hard to say again, how much of it is stuff that how much of it is like ideological versus how much of it is meant to be kind of edgelordy.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because scholar Hugh Urban talks about this aspect and raises the question of whether or not this was all just meant as satire, if this was kind of like supposed to be black humor, and all of the trappings and everything that were associated with the Church of Satan, that this was just supposed to be some kind of drama, as it were, that a sensationalist type of thing to get people chattering about all of this and get people talking and get people all excited and wound up about it. But that was basically what it was about was mainly ego driven and pursuing your own desires and what you want out of life, and kind of not, I wouldn't say in a altruistic way, but at the same time not really, at least on the surface anyway, not really bothering anyone with what you're doing. However, what you just raised, though, that there are all these problematic currents that are within Church of Satan as well that can't be ignored. But what do you think about this whole satire aspect?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. You run into this kind of problem with a lot of these sort of new religious movements in a way. I think anyway. I think you can do a read like this on Crowley, where you say what he's kind of doing is it's a performance art kind of a bit with a religion as part of what's happening, and sometimes you sort of see him look at the camera, right? With with the Temple of Satan, which is a totally different, or the Satanic Temple, which is a totally different organization with a very different ideology attached to it. There's always this kind of thing of people, it comes up anytime they're sort of interviewed. Someone's going, are you guys really in this about religion, or are you kind of trying to do this to make a political stance? Church of Satan is quite similar in that respect, that I think it's kind of without parsing what LeVay himself may or may not have thought, because there are conflicting reports. There are people within the Church of Satan at different points who seem to understand both that it is a kind of a show and satire for fun, and that the rituals are at most a sort of a psychodrama, right? This is the kind of, LeVay uses this term in many ways, right? When he talks about magic, he's got sort of lesser and greater magic, and lesser magic is stuff that doesn't have like an overt ritual component. And if you read like the Satanic Bible, a Satanic Witch, right? The kinds of things he talks about in magic, lesser magic, are just things like makeup or perfumes or like particular kinds of affectations to body language, like how you interact with people. It's just like the lowest sort of level, ways of kind of presenting yourself in the world that we all kind of do. Social media has made that super obvious right now, right? Yeah. The filter that I've got set on like 25% that like, makes me slightly less shiny is a form of lesser black magic, according to, LeVay. Yeah. And then there's magic that's the greater magic, so-called, right? Which are these sort of theatrical events. But again, you can read them as not necessitating any supernatural worldview at all, right? That these are just things that you're sort of doing to kind of work through your own sort of to motivate yourself mentally, to think about how you deal with things, right? So there's a ritual for, I thought about this because I was kind of poking around, Zeena in the interview talks about how she put a curse on her father. Yeah. And I was kind of like, I wonder where she got this from. I was kind of looking to see if I could find any descriptions of what she might have done in the sort of Church of Satan literature. And I couldn't, at least in the time that I spent poking around. But what I did find is, a description of a ritual that you can do to sort of reverse a curse that you believe has been put on you. And all you wind up doing basically is, it sounds like a magical ritual, right? But you make like a little gingerbread man or whatever out of the person that sort of cursed you. And then you sort of mock it and chop it up and eat it. And, you sort of basically consume your fear of having been placed under this curse, right? And you don't need that to be, you could invoke a bunch of like, archdemons or something to help you out in this process, presumably, if you wanted to. But the point of it is much more that you're just kind of trying to deal with things a little bit, acting out something to kind of change your own mental state.
Yeah, I didn't know if you knew anything about this, what she was referring to, what she called the severing ceremony, wherein she talked about that with regard to her father. I mean, we're kind of jumping ahead here because we're already talking about when Zeena was much older. But things didn't go very well between her and her father at a certain point. But maybe we should take one step back and talk about Zeena's youth, her childhood. I mean, she was baptized the year after the church was founded. She was baptized in 1967, and in the interview, she talked about how she felt like, she was very isolated child, and living in this kind of an odd environment. She had problematic relationship with her parents, of course, and of course they had their own problems from their parents. It's the generational cycles and things like that.
They were running the church out of the house that she grew up in for a long time, which had to be just really extremely weird on its own.
Yeah, but she was talking about how Richard Ramirez was a member, and all these weird people. I don't know. I don't think she used the word weird, but people that maybe were less than savory characters. Hanging out at their house and just and having all these ideas about who she was, what kind of person she was, and she just felt like this. It didn't really sit well with her. That's the impression that I got. Of course, she's speaking now with hindsight, looking back at this, so it might be, coloring the way she's telling her story and the narrative that is being presented. But at a certain point, though, she does start to talk about when I believe this was when she would be like in her early 20s, maybe late teens. She had a child, she said, that she was trying to protect. And this was all at the time that the satanic panic was flourishing in the country, and she felt
Yeah.
that because of the way people were reacting, the public, general, quote unquote, the society was kind of, there was a backlash against the Church of Satan. That she felt like she had to protect her father, and that's why she kind of became the spokesperson for the movement. And this is the Zeena that I was first introduced to as a young person myself.
Yeah, same.
Seeing her on Geraldo and very enigmatic, mysterious, well spoken, well put together young woman who was very articulate and seemed very knowledgeable about what it was that she was talking about, to try to fight back against all of these accusations that were being leveled against her father and the church.
Yeah.
But at this time, and correct me if I'm wrong, was she already involved with Nicholas Schreck at this time?
I think they met in 86 or somewhere in there. Okay. Definitely by 88. They were at least, they were sort of traveling in the same circles. They were involved in a big event together, which we can talk about in a bit if you want.
Yes, please. But if you want to talk about it now, that's fine too. I mean, I was just wondering, because you kind of mentioned about where would she get these ideas. I read that, or perhaps that was in your presentation even, that Nicholas Schreck was a theistic Satanist. He wasn't an atheist. He really believed in the reality of these deities or entities, or however you want to frame it. So I didn't know if maybe she was picking up on things from outside of the official Church of Satan doctrine.
Right. So that was the counterpart that I was gesturing towards earlier. So the Church of Satan's official line is, this is all sort of symbolism. The rituals are just sort of psychodrama, or they're just kind of, for fun, right? The Black Mass, so-called, is clearly contains some like parodic elements, things that are, and LaVey is relatively forthright about this as well, and kind of saying, we're kind of cribbing this from the, fantastical notions that, medieval inquisitors had of what a Black Mass would be like. Right. So we're going to do the thing that, people accused people of doing, but, so they had a, you can see this. There's a film called Satanis, The Devil's Mass, which you can find on YouTube if you want to see bits of this. It's basically, you've got an altar which is usually at least a naked acolyte of some sort. And the mass is performed, with various invocations of Satan and some bits that are cribbed from these sort of older texts, abjuring the Christian God and calling him a failure and stuff like that. And then a host is produced, like for a Eucharistic host, and dipped in urine and things like this. And then they sort of stomp on it. Yeah. So it's kind of the classic host desecration fantasies of the sort of medieval heresiologists. And then, of course, LaVey's there, and he's got a goofy. He dresses up like the devil from a comic book, right? With like little horns.
Caricature of the devil, with his widow's peak and his
pitchfork,
his cape, his slick back hair. Yeah.
He's playing the organ. They've got a chalice of whiskey or something going around.
Right.
So I think it was meant to be, fun and blasphemous, but like in a, if you don't really believe in, Catholicism, or at least a version where this, Jesus is sort of somehow present in a Eucharistic host, which presumably he didn't, then like, well, you've got a bit of bread, and you're peeing on a bread. And it's like, okay, it's not really, there's no danger there.
No,
right? Unless you have certain like theological assumptions that go into it.
That's what comes back to this whole psycho pomp and the drama and all of that stuff about, this is maybe more of a psychological type of ritual to like break the ties of, the restrictions of, what was, what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do, and all of that, the taboo and deviance and all of that stuff,
But, and to drum up publicity and sort of get people to pay their subscriptions to be a part of the church so they can go to the parties. So there is this, that's the official, party line for the church. There is a section within the church that even by the mid 70s, so like 10 years in or whatever, splits off. And the people who were involved in this claim that, that LaVey had this one line for the public, but then in private, amongst his inner circle, it turns out he really believes in all this stuff. And supposedly, he's a very, thoughtful, philosophical kind of guy. And the carnival barker persona is just sort of for the public to throw off the muggles. But like, if you really got in deep, there's real religion under the surface there. So they claim. So one of these guys, this is where the Temple of Set comes from,
right,
basically. Yeah. So they eventually split because they claim that they have a communication from the entity that they had understood as Satan, and that the entity says, I'm not actually Satan, I'm the Egyptian god Set, and here's what I'd rather you do instead of this, like, this was like nice to kind of get the ball rolling sort of thing, but like actually, now you can progress into something that's a bit more grown up, and they take things a good deal more seriously.
Yes.
With certain caveats, again, with the understanding that the guy who founds it is, or who seems to be the prime mover for a lot of it, is either by occupation or by aspiration working in psyops in the military. So,
so Michael Aquino?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of conspiracy around that man. His goings on within the government. Well, he was military, so yeah,
He was military, but it's not totally clear to me whether, if you're military psyops, then probably they don't just give you a giant badge that says that you work in the psyops division. So it's not clear whether, that was his actual job or whether he just worked in like the supply chain and was sort of writing these books on the side and trying to do this thing.
Right.
But obviously, like Zeena for that matter, like clearly an extraordinarily intelligent person. But it's based on the nature of his writings. You can imagine why you wouldn't necessarily. He tells you pretty straightforwardly that some percentage of what he's saying, you can infer, should not be taken literally, that he's like explicitly writing a manual for sort of how to manipulate crowds of people. And if that's your gig, right, then
I find this interesting.
Let the buyer beware.
Yeah. I find it interesting, though, because wasn't he the one that said that he felt that he was the product of the Babylon working?
He does claim that.
Yeah. So there are some other there are other things going on there with this also very mysterious man. I find a lot of these characters within this entire larger area to also be very enigmatic people.
Parsons and Hubbard and these guys, right?
Yeah, exactly. They're all very because they're doing things that at that time this wasn't open and common knowledge. People didn't talk about this all the time. This wasn't what you read about in the newspaper or heard about on your Phil Donahue show, unless it was supposed to be, it had to do with the satanic panic or something like that, when everybody's supposed to be afraid of it. But this wasn't just like, oh yeah, let's just go down the street to Anton's house and let's just do some rituals. And, it just didn't seem, at least when I was growing up, it didn't seem that way. It seemed to be shrouded in this mysterious, trappings of what is it actually that they're doing. So if we could kind of swing back around to what Zeena was doing at this time, because she left the Church of Satan at this time to join the Temple of Set together with...
She left the Church of Satan to join the Temple of Set. That wasn't until the early 2000s, I think.
Oh, okay.
It took a while before she did this, but I think she's sort of running with this crowd.
Because it was before this time that she actually...
They joined in 95.
Okay.
Sorry.
But at this time, they were already with Radio Werewolf and making the music and doing the performance art and all of this stuff, right?
Yeah. So from my timeline here, so Nicholas Schreck founds the Radio Werewolf Project or the Werewolf Order, which, I think... Again, it's one of these dubious things of, is it sort of meant to be the fan club for the band, or is it like an actual sort of religious order?
Right.
but this is in 1984. And then Zeena joins in 1988, or at least joins as co-director. I'm assuming that that means that that's when she actually gets involved. I've seen no evidence other than her involvement in the Church of Satan that she ever gets involved with anything except under the, like, she seems like, her mode is like, I will play as long as I'm in charge. Right. So
Yeah.
it's really hard for me to imagine from the point that she becomes the co-director is, to my thinking, that must mean that's the point where she gets involved. I can't see her joining anything without.
No, because she was always a high priestess. So, she always had to
Right.
have that title. So, I mean, and on the
Yeah.
one hand, I can kind of understand that if you are the spokesperson and you're supposed to be the most knowledgeable about everything, and you have this influence in I don't know if she really felt that she had any influence really, but on the surface to the outside world, it looked like she had a lot of influence. But I think that title was very important to her. I mean, I would assume it would be important to her.
Yeah.
Okay, so she's slowly starting then to, and in the interview, she started to talk about this, that she started to have, and I found this very interesting because she wasn't really framing it in terms of what she was actually doing at the time, but she was framing it more in Buddhist principles about thinking about, the nature of
Yeah.
religion and the nature of, well, this has to have some kind of meaning and a purpose and all of these. And I wonder if that's now being conflated with the persona that she wants to portray now, if that's how she's speaking of the past, or if that was really what was happening in the past. Of course, I would not know. I have no way of knowing that. I don't know if you have any ideas about
Yeah.
it.
I mean, my idea about it, I mean, most fundamentally is that this is what we do anytime we remember something. Like
Sure.
remembering is sort of as we
Sure.
recode it in light of where we are in the present. I think she's doing that to a very high degree, but it's no different from what any of us do.
Right. Yeah.
To kind of cut back, I encountered her in the same way that you did, which is to say on Donahue or Geraldo or whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
For the same reason, right? Which is sort of satanic panic. Everyone, not everyone, the media, the American media is very invested in the idea that people should be terrified that Satanists are going to like abduct your kids from daycare and sacrifice them based on, you know, recovered memory
Yeah.
stuff that's probably just playing on the fact that little children can be suggestible. That there's not good evidence that, that definitely people abuse children. Having grown up in like Christian churches, I can tell you that a lot of that happens in Christian churches. I would guess just on basic percentages of children in Christian churches versus children that get abducted, from their preschool by somebody in a van. There's probably a great deal more abuse happening in the churches than ever happened by like random cultists abducting children to abuse them.
I recall her talking about, but this is one of the points that she made, was that she was afraid that her son was going to be taken away from her because of all of this McMartin preschool trial that was happening at that time, and all of these fantastical stories that were coming out about children being taken down in tunnels and people flying
It's
around.
QAnon. It's the beta version of QAnon,
yes, right? Yes. I mean, there were never any. I mean, that all of the investigations that were done, never was there a shred of evidence that they could, corroborate with any of the stories that these children were saying. But these stories were so fantastical about, oh yeah, we went down these elevators, or oh no, they didn't go. They went through the toilets, right? They went through the toilets down into the tunnels, and then people were flying around. I mean, it was fantastical. It was just a huge fantasy, and yet everyone, for whatever reason at that time, I don't know if it was like, you kind of get caught up in the wave of hysteria, the mass hysteria. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That people just went along with this and said, oh, this must be true. These people must be, what these children are saying. You have to believe the children. And I find that to be such a difficult area to tread. You have to tread that so lightly, because you do want to believe people if they come to you and they tell you there's something wrong, someone is hurting me, someone is abusing me. Of course you want to believe the person that's coming to you at this, but on the other hand, the way that in this particular instance with these children, the way that they were approached, They were oftentimes led in the questioning, prompted, things were suggested to them. It wasn't just a scenario of a little child coming to an adult saying, this happened to me. It wasn't like that at all. It was a completely different kind of context. So I want to be very careful in how I frame this, of course, because I don't want to say, well, you shouldn't believe people. But in the way that this was all happening, with the way that the children were being questioned, the way that they were being led in the questioning and being prompted, and it wasn't, I think the tactics that were being used at that time, nowadays that doesn't happen anymore. I think there are strict rules for those types of things happening in these types of cases, if there are law enforcement involved, or professional medical personnel involved. I think they have much stricter protocols now because of all of this type of thing. But anyway, got off on a tangent there. But Zeena was afraid that because of something like this, which was, this was happening in real life, people were going to jail. These were, this was a very long, expensive trial. She thought, I'm going to lose my son. My father is going to be harmed in some way because of this. I guess there were death threats, things like that. So she took this very seriously. And yet there seemed to be at this point, at least over the course of several years, that she started to question everything. And at a certain point, she left. And then in the interview, she made this statement about her father threatened her life. What happened there? Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, I've not seen documentary evidence that.
This was news to me. I didn't know about this.
Yeah, I've only heard it from her.
Right. Okay. And for me, it was the first time hearing her talk about it in this interview with Jordan Peterson. So I found that to be surprising. I didn't know that had occurred, and she didn't offer any explanation as to, any additional information as to what led to this or how it happened or what was said. She just said, he threatened my life and I had to leave. So, and that's why she wanted to curse him. And so I'm like, wow, this is like a story, but then she didn't go into it. So I'm like, okay, we just have to take her word at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure she had plenty of threats. I'm sure there were plenty of threats also against him. And also he was we can reasonably infer just from the way that he sort of shrunk from the public eye, and it seems like this kind of, I mean, for a person who really sort of lived for publicity, right, to really retreat like that must have been a very, I imagine his mental health was not tip top, right, for a while there. So people say all kinds of dark things, right, when they're in those spaces, and it seems like he was also, to begin with, maybe a bit of an eccentric character. So,
true. Yeah,
it seems eminently plausible that they had a strongly worded falling out, and that she also had many threats against her life already. Mm-hmm. That would be a credible thing.
Yeah,
she is, in this position as a spokesperson, right, for the church. At the same time, it seems like that she is also exploring some ideas about what she calls like Teutonic mysticism, right? With Nicholas Schreck. That is to say, what will be sort of we can crudely sort of just gloss as like Nazi occultism, based on sort of what they're into later. She, by 1990, claims that she got initiated into some form of like Hindu goddess traditions. And Nicholas Schreck says, by that point also that he's been doing some of this. He's been doing Zen meditation for kind of forever or whatever. So they have these things on the table. And even within the Church of Satan, there are all these different sub-orders that focus on different things, right? So there's definitely an order within the Temple of Set that explicitly focuses on yoga and tantra and stuff like that, which they seem to have been a part of. Within the Church of Satan, I don't know that there's one that does that sort of thing. In fact, one of the things that LaVey says in Satanic Bible is that, if you want to if the point of the Black Mass is to insult the pieties, of society at a given point, then the kinds of things that you would do in a Black Mass would be to desecrate like psychedelics and marijuana, right? Or pictures of Indian gurus and things like that, right? These are the kinds of things that he's taking as a target of things that are, objects to be sort of debunked or desacralized. But so she and Nicholas are both kind of, swimming in these waters a little bit, at least it seems like from the early 90s, maybe even a little bit earlier than that.
I'd like to, if we can, I'd like to kind of unpack this a little bit further, because I'm not certain if everyone of the listeners are understanding of the references. We mentioned Radio Werewolf and the Werewolf Order. What was behind all of this terminology, and maybe you could go into a little bit of that. There is kind of this underbelly of all of this very problematic types of thinking in this milieu where they're kind of moving in, and maybe it would be good to highlight what was going on there, so that before we move on to the next section of their lives, the next projects and stuff like that, that we have kind of a context of where we remember.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny, at the same time, or maybe just slightly after, but in some ways there's this bound to be overlap. At the same time that Zeena is going on the talk show circuit to try to assure people that the Church of Satan is a rational organization, and no, we don't do sacrifices of any sort, and no, we don't break any laws, right? And it's a, an individualist philosophy of a sort that is, maybe you don't especially like it, but it's like it's American as apple pie, right? And this kind of, she's doing this like great PR work for the church, as this kind of, femme fatale, imperious figure, right? Who's very much in control of these talk show hosts, and like, so running circles around the televangelists who dare to try to tangle with her as well, which I thought was fantastic. Right? As a kid, I was just like, this is amazing.
I remember just eating that up, man. I love watching that stuff on TV. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, that was fun. I downloaded all the Bob Larson videos and started rewatching them. It's like, this is great stuff.
Yeah.
But she's doing this kind of PR push, to sort of burnish their image. And at the same time, she's involved increasingly with Nicholas Schreck in this Radio Werewolf project, which is doing precisely the opposite thing. So the alleged genesis of this is that Nicholas Schreck, he claims that this is her husband or partner of many years. They're divorced now. He says that he grows up in an environment that's extremely permissive, and he's kind of allowed and encouraged or whatever to dabble with whatever kind of religious ideas that are around. And so at a certain point anyway, he goes to Egypt, and he's kind of trying to do the Crowley thing of going to Egypt and trying to do magic and get in touch with Egyptian gods and such. And he gets into contact with Set, as one does, I guess. And the Set's message to him is, don't be a coward. You should go back and fight. And so what Nicholas interprets this to mean is that his instruction that he's got from the gods is he should go back to America and like poke his fingers in the eyes of the conservative forces that are, that are sort of behind the satanic panic and whatever, and basically kind of set himself up as, the villain that they want. So just sort of be everything that they're actually afraid that the Satanists are into. So he goes back, wearing Nazi uniforms, and the Radio Werewolf thing, which is the name, they get the name from the Nazi radio stations that were behind Allied lines. It was like the Nazi resistance radio. So, clearly drawing on these kinds of illusions. It's a musical project, though, and they're kind of in the LA, like, shock, like, goth punky kind of scene. A lot of it I don't find personally extremely listenable, but there's if you're going to listen to any of it, just to kind of get the flavor of it, there's an interesting-ish cover of These Boots Are Made for Walking with Zeena on the vocals, and the percussion track is like, jack boots marching.
Yeah.
So like that's the clomp, 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 clomp. That you get the vibe of kind of what they're on about. It gets sort of more experimental a bit later on, musically anyway. Mm-hmm. But so there's a lot of this kind of provocateuring, a lot of overt sort of pushing fascist imagery and things like that. And at this point, Nicholas says, as you pointed out, he identifies himself as a devil worshiper. He's like, he says he never really joined the Church of Satan. He got given like an honorary member card or whatever. But it wasn't his thing because he was a true believer in this stuff. And so they are involved in an event called 8888, right? So you get the 88 thing. If you've seen this, graffiti around, it's around here in the Netherlands even, under the occasional bridge. This is a coded, because H is the eighth letter of the alphabet. So 88 is HH, so Heil Hitler, blah, blah, blah. Right. Also good to notice if you see anyone, people with their Twitter handle or whatever, and it's so-and-so 88, it could just be they're born in 1988, but
you do. You
worth
might
asking.
not. You might be dealing with somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah. So they put on this event with some truly unsavory figures like Boyd Rice and some of these guys. And you can see that these guys are involved, Boyd Rice and others are involved in some of the Radio Werewolf stuff, as well as some members of the White Aryan Resistance and some other, if they're not really into like the sort of like fascist thing and it's just for play, then somehow or other they've got the fascists have also come to the party and are there in the photos. So
with the salute and everything. So but again, this because Zeena liked to talk about this. If she was asked, well, that was his performance art. This is all transgressive and it's antagonistic, and I don't know. I don't know enough about that particular aspect to understand if that's really what was going on or if there was something else. But I kind of wonder if there might be something else. But please finish what you were saying.
That's my take as well. It's all well and good to say something is just performance art, but if the actual fascists are there at the party and in the photos, then I don't know. Do they not know that it's performance art? Are they supposed to be in on the joke? Because they're pretty clearly serious in other contexts.
Right.
They're into this stuff, somehow, but whether for whatever reason, with the way whether they're retconning it or what, but the way that they frame it now, or at least the last that I've seen, when they deign to talk about it, is that they were into the imagery, they were into some of the, that is to say, the fascist imagery, the Nazi occultism, somewhat they were into the religious aspects of it, and they didn't really care about the politics of it. But they don't hate anybody, blah, blah, blah. We just kind of thought the religious aspects of it are interesting. And Nicholas Schreck at one point says, that he thought the interesting thing was the program that the Nazis had for after the war, for trying to kind of remake a pagan Europe. That's what they thought was cool or interesting or something.
Yeah. What do you say to that? Yeah. It's kind of okay. Well,
it's de rigueur in a temple of Set, and as well. Aquino had been doing some of this kind of thing, and some of the Temple of Set documents talk about this as well, where they kind of say, look, part of the point of this, left-hand path type idea, right, which Temple of Set is more overtly invested in than the Church of Satanists, as a sort of self-identification. Part of the point is to be sort of antinomian, and to sort of be transgressive and break social norms. And then one of the things they point out is the stuff that would break social norms back in the day, right, is just not really that shocking anymore. So you have to really up your game if you want to be shocking. And just saying, we have the occasional drunken orgy, and that's people would go, okay, well, I mean, whatever, you're in Southern California, that's not right,
Right.
So whatever, it's your religion, it's fine. You have to do something else if you want to get under people's skin, or push your own boundaries. And that's kind of how they would justify it.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, I agree that they felt that they had to do something really extreme, because just sex and drugs, that's in California, everybody's going to be like, so what,
Yep.
So they have to do that. So I can see maybe that there might be just this little kernel of truth in there that, they are doing something transgressive, but I don't know, just for me personally, it just completely turns me off if I see imagery and symbolism like that, with the black sun and all of that stuff. I just don't like that personally, at all.
Yeah, I mean, they ignore the thing you can also do in Indian, the tantric traditions that they often draw on, which is to, go in for using human remains in various rituals, perhaps even certain forms of ritualized cannibalism,
Right.
things like that, right? There are boundaries you could push that don't necessarily involve like there are ways you could do this other than going, for fascism
Certainly, and that's very
as the way
extreme
to be
too.
provocative.
Very
Yeah,
extreme
yeah,
too.
sure.
Yeah, sleeping with the corpses of in the graveyard and things like that. Yeah, and doing all kinds of other things as well. I guess what I'm getting at with all of this is that maybe the reason that this particular aspect was adopted is that the underlying ideology or philosophy had to do with Julius Evola. And if that was already present and active within this group. I just don't know,
Yeah.
how far back does this go?
Mhm.
Where do we see the beginnings of this?
Yeah, that's also hard for me to pin down precisely.
Okay.
I mean, I think it is fair to say that even if you just sort of go back to the Church of Satan in Levay, right? Um, that flirtation with fascist imagery and this kind of thing is there. The, might makes right sorts of ideas and things like that are definitely there. So I think that is baked in, a particular kind of anti-liberal in the like American sense, sensibility, political conservatism is, I think, that's the starting assumption for a lot of this, right? They're permissive on certain things like sexual mores and whatever, right? But like, it is not an egalitarianly oriented project, and it's not a project that has a view. It's not a progressive project in the sense that like they're not invested in the idea of trying to make society better, right? This is like figure out what the rules are and exploit the rules to your advantage for like your individual advantage is sort of the beginning and the end of their political project, as far as I could tell. So I mean, if this is where they're coming from fundamentally, then I think it lends itself easily to involvement in other kinds of far right thinkers, including the sort of Nazi occultists and including figures like Evola, or somewhat less problematically, Genon or Shun, or these other kinds of traditionalist type thinkers. So, if the general notion is one that, that society is going in the wrong direction and what we need is strong leadership and preferably some kind of a religious basis to undergird the government in order to sort of ensure sort of social cohesion. And that means something like an ethno-state in order to kind of be able to create a populace that's going to be similarly inclined to particular kinds of religious ideas. If those are all the sorts of assumptions that you begin with, then I think that's it's not a huge leap in terms of what they're into. So Evola, from what I've seen anyway, they only bring him up explicitly coming out of the, I guess, the late 90s, when they write a book together on sex magic. And so Demons of the Flesh, the complete guide to left-hand path sex magic. And it's dedicated to Evola, and it's mentioned at various points in the book. So, this is a guy who, he was an Italian fascist. He sometimes would balk at the label because he thought that what we think of as the Italian fascists were not hardcore enough. He met with the Nazis at certain points as well, and they sort of sent him back because they thought he was too extreme.
Yeah.
But he had a particular interest in Indian religions because, among other things, the Nazis had some of this notion as well. That he had the thinking was that these are Aryan religious traditions that are more or less untainted by Semitic, ideas and weaknesses, right? So he was interested in Hinduism, Buddhism, yoga, this kind of stuff, as a means to sort of cultivate power, self-mastery, and so forth. And he had a social program or political program that sort of he imagined went along with that until the fascists sort of were like obviously out of power, at which point he sort of declared that he was apolitical and didn't care about politics anymore. But where that means, and this is, I think, what Nicholas Schreck and presumably Zeena is on a similar tip, what they mean when they say that they're apolitical, which is that they have political ideals in mind, but they don't see them as actionable within the current context. So they're just sort of going to sit it out. So it doesn't mean that they don't care about politics, so they don't have ideas about how things ought to be, but just that, like, well, it's not going to happen, so why bother? It's a waste of time.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I should point out, by the way, that I'm kind of interpreting them together a lot of the time to try to infer. He has been, more active as a writer and more active on social media. She is, I think, I'm assuming genuine and probably right in her frequent insistence that social media rots our brains and is something to largely be avoided. Right. That seems likely, but he's more online. But he presents himself in many cases as that she is his sort of religious guru. So
okay, right.
So this is why I would assume that they're more or less on the same page with stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, with Evola though, one of the things that he is really into, I should say, is I think this was their entry point ideologically into a lot of these kinds of tantric notions. And Evola mixes it with the Grail quests and some other stuff, right? As long as he feels like it's, Indo-European kinds of traditions that can kind of see them as all being part of a similar stream.
Okay, so maybe we can unpack this then, because after Zeena and Nicholas left the Temple of Set, they... You noted in your presentation that they converted to Tibetan Buddhism. And then also around this time, they formed this Sethian liberation movement, or quote unquote, the storm. They also use that term. And this had a lot of talk about Tantra. So maybe we can stand still with Sethian liberation movement. What is this? What do they mean by this? And then we can start to unpack this notion of Tantra and how they're using this in a very specific way. And it's not probably the way that most people in the West are thinking about what Tantra is when they hear that word. So first about the Sethian liberation movement, and then we'll move on to Tantra.
Sure. So I think to understand this, we have to pedal back a little bit into the Temple of Set.
Okay.
Right. So if we recall, Temple of Set is split off from the Church of Satan by people who say that Anton LaVey had secret teachings for an inner circle, where it actually was a religious project, and that furthermore that Michael Aquino, and he frames this in very specific vocabulary that makes it sound like he's not really saying that he necessarily got it directly from a god, but it's he's very precise in his wording about this. But he produces a text that presents itself as the speech of the god Set, the Egyptian god Set, connects the Church of Satan to certain ideas directly from Aleister Crowley and to the Parsons Babylon working, which is supposed to, beget yet another new aeon that's even different from the one that Crowley said started in 1904. So the Temple of Set then now is focused on this Egyptian god Set, who it presents as the quote-unquote kind of sort of like real Satan, sort of misunderstood figure. But this is an entity who is, not necessarily benevolent, right? But he's not like evil per se either, right? He's just a person who challenges you and makes, tests people's sort of mettle and causes a certain amount of what seems to us like, difficulty and strife in the process, but this is how we grow, right? It's just that kind of idea. And within the Temple of Set, there are all these suborders working different stuff. So there's some of them doing the Nazi occult stuff really hardcore. There's some doing kind of Norse paganism, as a sort of a separate track. There's some doing like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming type stuff, right? And people are involved in these. So there's one of them that is pretty directly involved in pursuing kind of like Indian yoga and bhakti and these kinds of like Hindu traditions. It seems pretty clear that Zeena and Nicholas Schreck are involved in this particular order quite heavily, and this is where they really begin to sort of pursue this more earnestly. Now, she's involved in they're involved in the Temple of Set, as you know, would be the norm, I guess, in this case. She's only interested as long as she gets to be high priestess, it seems like. And from the point that they say it's time for you to rotate out of leadership position, that's when she pieces out. And we get the foundation of the Sethian liberation movement, which is her own sort of spinoff, where she remains as the high priestess. And kind of, and the teachings are now more directly infused with yoga, Kundalini yoga in particular, and some of these ideas. My sense is the storm is exactly the same thing. It's kind of just a rebranding.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure they just kind of wanted to move Set like slightly out of the name for.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Or make it a little bit more sort of broad in its orientation, but Set's a storm god among other things, right? So it's kind of they're still in the same mode. By the way, even I don't know that they teach it directly in their guise or in their role as Buddhist teachers, if that's how they would explicitly frame it. But they are both still clearly involved in Set has not gone away. They've just sort of found a place for him in a sort of Buddhist cosmology. So they haven't dropped that.
Yeah, talk about that, because you've got an Egyptian god and then they're Buddhists. So how is this matching? How is this rhyming here? Well, how are they explaining this?
The easiest way to sort of wrap this is to say they would connect it to certain basic myths about the spread of Buddhism in Tibet. Specifically, so Buddhism, there are two, by the normal history of these things, right? It makes it a little neater than it, really historically would have been. But in the traditional histories of this kind of happens twice. There's one occasion where the Emperor of Tibet invites a monk in to sort of teach Buddhism, and he actually invites some monks from India and some monks from China, and they have a debate, and they kind of decide they want to go with the Indian version, and tries to propagate Buddhism in Tibet by sort of royal decree, but the local gods aren't having it. And so then there's another figure who comes in from India, who the Tibetans understand to be a second or a further reincarnation of the Buddha or something to that effect, called Padmasambhava, a miraculous sort of yogi figure. And what he's most famous for is that he tames the local gods. Basically, he goes systematically throughout the country and converts the local gods to Buddhism. And those that he cannot convert properly, that is to say, like make them into themselves devoted Buddhists, he at least binds them with like contracts that they have to be nice and that they will agree not to have animal sacrifices anymore, but they'll accept these other substitutes or something like that. Or some of them still get blood sacrifices, but like they have to basically agree that they will not hinder the Buddhists in the region, and that they'll be useful when they're called upon. And still the liturgies, if you look at Tibetan liturgies for this, it's still there, where the basic way that people deal with some of these gods is you say, in the text, it says like, remember, you cut a deal, you signed a contract, you took an oath, we're giving you your blood and your meat that you need to be powerful. Now you do what you need to do for us, because that's the deal that you struck back in the like 9th century or whatever.
All right. So
there are a range of these spirits all now throughout Tibet that are like not Indian gods. Some of them kind of later get sort of merged in certain ways to whatever, but they're understood to be. It's understood that local gods can be either converted, and sometimes the local gods then themselves become Buddhas, or the local gods can be just contracted as, sort of mercs.
Okay.
That they will be well behaved, and if they're not well behaved, then some other monk comes in and threatens to kill them, or sometimes does dispatch them. So there's a way to deal with like all manner of deities along this model. So it's pretty simple then for them to say, all right, there's an entity set, very old god, very powerful. Sometimes it's been misinterpreted. People thought he was Satan. Sometimes, perhaps in other contexts, is operates under different names. But um, that this deity too, they would say has now operates in this role as what they call dharmapala, so like a protector of the dharma. Whether that means that he is like fully converted Buddhist, or whether that means that he's just kind of a contractor. I don't know precisely how they
Okay.
how they would do that, but like there's a space for that to say
Okay.
like this guy works for us now.
This is the end of the free podcast content. For the full episode, you can visit my Patreon page and either join the Tier 1 membership, or you can purchase the episode for a small fee. There's much more content available over at Patreon, so I hope you will consider having a look. One housekeeping note, there will be no content in the month of November as I'm moving to a new home and will also be in the process of setting up my home office and studio. I'm planning to return in December with Brennan Cattell to discuss more monster theory, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for listening.